Hello my fellow kin, welcome back to the channel and welcome to another unit analysis video. A long awaited unit analysis video might I add, because in today's video we'll be taking a look at the Brokyr Thunderkyn. As always, we'll examine who they are, find out how to best equip them, how to best use them, discuss some stratagems and combos, and wrap the video up with some important considerations to keep in mind for when you decide to run this unit. But before we go any further, I want to remind you all that we now have a Discord server for the channel where you could join free of charge and interact with a growing community of like-minded Votann players, talk tactics, share photos, and even get your models featured in my weekly videos, as we see here with this beautifully painted army by one of our Discord users, Travis. So if you want in on the fun, don't forget to join our server using the link in the description below. So who are the Brokyr Thunderkyn? Well, in the lore they represent some of the more elite gunner units deployed by the kin, whether it's for mining minerals, exploring planets, or adding gunfire to the fray. The Thunderkyn represent the very elite of the kin, riding around in mech suits and carrying big guns. On the table, they're represented as some heavy gunners. They're decently tough and survivable, and they bring mass volume of fire. Much like the lore, they're also best included in a list as being designed to pick apart key targets depending on which weapon profile you include, at least in theory. Now, I'm going to say something that I know will be controversial to many of you, and I was initially looking to save this discussion for the end of the video, but I think it's better if I say it now because this unit will be under heavy scrutiny today. I personally do not like how this unit feels on the table, and I have no idea how some very few people are having good competitive success with it. I say this because this will be one of our most in-depth unit analysis videos yet, as I try to showcase for you today both why I think this unit is not only not as good as people may think, but also why, in my humble opinion, it needs a redesign in the codex. Okay, so how do you run the Brokyr Thunderkyn? I put the data card up on the screen for you here, and we can see that these guys are movement speed 5, toughness 6, 3 up base save, 3 wounds, leadership 7, and OC 1. So they're somewhat durable, having the highest wound count on any infantry unit available to Votann at this time, other than of course the characters. They have the ability to overwatch on 5, which is also pretty nice as a deterrent for your opponent when they do consider to get close to you, because Votann don't really have any options at this time to act as a good overwatch source. The units come in squads of 3 or 6, being 85 or 170 points, and they can also be led by a character who very uniquely is a powerful force multiplier for the unit he's attached to. The character that attaches to this unit is a Brokhyr Ironmaster, and what he does is he provides +1 to hit to the unit. Now it's important to note that +1 to hit does not stack intuitively with your +1 to hit as a result of the judgment token. But what this does do is, instead of allowing you to hit on 2s, it means you essentially just ignore any other -1 to hit modifiers your opponent might have, like stealth. So it's not useless. It actually does have an impact, and it comes in handy, not only for this, but also because it makes the unit a little bit more independent. You're not necessarily reliant on going after targets that only have judgment tokens in order to get the most effective output from your models. In this case, with a character attached, yes, it goes up to 235 points, but it allows you to be a little bit more flexible in your deployment and your targets. The Ironmaster also adds some added durability to the unit through his drones that accompany him. So essentially, the Brokyr Thunderkyn act as bodyguards for the Ironmaster, but the Ironmaster's drones act as bodyguards for the Brokyr Thunderkyn. So if you do get shot by something with high AP and high damage, then just pass the damage off onto your drones instead, saving the unit. In terms of ranged weapon output, we have 3 choices. We have the Bolt Cannon, which is sustained hits 1, 36-inch range 3 attacks, BS 4, strength 6, -1 AP 2 damage. The Graviton Blast Cannon, which is anti-vehicle 2+, blast, 18-inch range, D6 attacks, BS 4, strength 5, -2 AP 2 damage. And lastly, the SP Conversion Beamer, which has the conversion keyword and sustained hits D3. This comes in at 24-inch range, 1 attack, BS 4, strength 7, -1 AP 3 damage. So just surface level, it looks like each one of these weapons are here to fit a different role. We have the Graviton as an anti-tank, the Bolt Cannon as anti-infantry, and the SP Conversion Beamer as an anti-elite. The Graviton seems to be the most default competitive choice when we do see Thunderkyn run in competitive lists, but I question if this is the only viable way to run them, and if the Graviton and the unit as a whole is viable in itself. So let's do some math and figure it out. Now the first weapon I want to look at is the Bolt Cannon, and again I put the stats here up on the screen for you to see. We're going to be running with 3 assumptions today. The first one is that the target we're shooting at has 2 judgment tokens on it, meaning it's +1 to hit and +1 to wound. We're also going to assume that it is bare bones, meaning that it does not benefit from cover, it does not have any stratagems on it to add defensive value, and we're also assuming that this is a per model basis, meaning one single Brokyr Thunderkyn model in the unit equipped with a bolt cannon is shooting. Running the numbers, we get something that looks like this. And as you can see on the screen, and as you're probably used to by now, we have the toughness levels on the side. We have the save characteristics at the top. In black, we have the total amount of unsaved wounds that go through per model. And then in green, which is the colored number underneath, we have what is the total amount of raw damage that goes in, simply taking the unsaved wounds in black and multiplying that by the damage characteristic, in this case 2 for the bolt cannon. So black is unsaved wounds, and green is the total amount of damage. To start things off, I blocked off the invulnerable saves because I just want to focus on the left-hand side for regular base saves that units might have. And so just eyeing this quickly, surface level for some of the highest damage output, it looks like it does best into realistic targets anyway, that sit at less than toughness 6 with a 3-up or 4-up base save, or at toughness 6 with a 4-up base save. Another area worth considering is at the less than toughness 6, 5-up, and 6-up base save level. Over here we see between 1.76 and 2.08 unsaved wounds that go through, which translates to 3.52 raw damage and 4.17 raw damage respectively. So let's plug a couple examples in just to get a better idea of what this actually looks like on the table. So if I have 3 bolt cannons and I'm shooting at a unit of cultists with a 6-up base save, I can expect to reliably kill 6 cultists on average. Why is that? Because I take the total amount of unsaved wounds, because these guys only have 1 wound each, and I simply multiply that by the amount of models shooting, in this case 3. So 3 bolt cannons will kill 6 cultists, because 2.08 times 3 is 6. I also threw in some scarabs on the screen here, and so for the scarabs, we can see that we reliably pick up a squad of 3 if we shoot at it with 3 bolt cannons, and assuming that the unit has 2 judgment tokens on it, because in this case, we get 2.08 unsaved wounds that go through, translating to 4.17 damage each. So every bolt cannon shooting into scarabs will actually do 4 damage, killing the squad. Now, this is not realistic, because we're not actually going to ever be in a situation, well, hopefully, where we want to judge scarabs or we want to judge cultists. And because of that, I don't think it's fair for us to just look at these numbers. So what we're going to do instead is actually rerun the simulation here very quickly at the bottom, as you can see on the screen, for the 5+ and 6+ base save level, just so that we could see what it looks like when we actually shoot at cultists or scarabs without judgment tokens on them. So without any judgment tokens, what we see is that instead of killing 6 cultists on average with a squad of 3, we actually wind up just killing 5. And again, this is with a 6+ base save, but no judgment tokens on the target. So 1 fewer cultists are dead. What's really interesting and discouraging to see is that if we shot a squad of 3 Thunderkyn into a squad of 3 scarabs without any judgment tokens, we actually wind up only killing 1. Yeah, I know, it sucks. Why is that? Well, you can see on the side here, at a 6+ base save less than toughness 3, we actually wind up doing only 1.67 unsaved wounds per model. This results in, on average, 3.33 damage per model. What this really means is that there's gonna be spillover. We won't have enough damage with these units to pick up the scarab squad. So instead, you have to start accounting for 2 models inflicting a total of 6 damage to kill 1 scarab that has 4 wounds because of that spillover. Ultimately, what this looks like is 1 dead scarab and 1 at half wounds. Now, with the release of the Orc Codex and the predicted prevalence of Bully Boys lists, I wanted to include some of our enemy greenskins into this analysis today. So against a squad of double-judged boys, 3 bolt cannons will pick up about 5 models, while a squad of 6 can get around 10. So this is actually pretty decent in my opinion when you consider that the range of this weapon is 36 inches. So what this means is that you essentially stay out of max threat range during a WA, which is pretty good. So you get to stay out of range from their advance, their move, and their charge, possible distance, and still be able to get a turn of shooting before you're within danger. Alright, so what about the numbers we first identified in green? Well, if we take a look here and plug in a Primaris Intercessor body at less than toughness 6 with a 3-up base save, we see that 3 bolt cannons will kill 3 Primaris Intercessors on average. Using another example, we plug in some knobs. We see that 3 bolt cannons kill about 4 knobs on average. So again, not terrible. Where things get a little shaky is if we throw something in with a 2-up base save. For Mega Knobs, we see the brutal impact of a good save coupled with a strong Feel No Pain, bringing the expected damage of a 6-man strong unit of Bolt Cannon Thunderkyn down to just 3 damage, killing a single Mega Knob on average. However, if you do somehow get to shoot at them before the effect kicks in, being the 4-up Feel No Pain, you can likely pick up around 2, which could be impactful and nice. The last example we'll look at is something that's very tough, being an Imperial Knight in this case. So something that's toughness 12 or higher with a 3-up base save, and in this case 6 bolt cannons will do about 5 damage to a knight. So pretty pitiful, but it's expected. The weapon isn't designed to do this. Okay, so into targets with relevant and vulnerable saves, it looks like we generally follow the same trend of being better into things with lower toughness than our strength. However, because we're only AP 1, we actually see that the higher we go in toughness, the less of an impact the invulnerable save has on our damage output, being most significant on things that are less than toughness 6. So at this level, this is where invulns have the biggest impact on our damage. Okay, so what are my initial thoughts on the bolt cannon so far? Well, it looks like it's not super impactful into too many targets in the game, but it does allow you to compensate for your slow movement by being 36 inches, meaning that you have a much larger threat range, and in return, you could potentially avoid the threat range of others for at least one activation. The biggest issue in my opinion with the bolt cannon is that for 5 or 10 points more, I get a squad of 3 or 6 bikes, which effectively has the exact same output as these guys do on just one of their guns. On top of that, I get access to 2 other guns, which, while sure, the range on these are all a lot lower than 36 inches, the volume of fire, the mobility, the damage output is so much higher altogether. Profile-wise, they're also quite comparable, being both toughness 6 and 3 wounds, whereas the Thunder can get a slightly better save. Conversely, the Pioneers gain double their movement, over double their movement, twice their OC, a scout move, the ability to go up and down out of reserves, so they have a much more significant presence on the table, better secondary play, and arguably better primary play when you consider that they're higher OC and that they have more shooting. And most importantly, they have the ability to ignore cover. This is one of the biggest issues I have with the Thunderkyn unit in its current state, and it's how adversely affected the output becomes as soon as cover is introduced to the mix. And with the ability to go to ground to get free cover on a unit, it absolutely cripples your damage output. I'll show you a quick example just to emphasize how detrimental this is to our output. So over here on the screen, you'll see I have the above bolt cannon with 2 judgment token graphic for you. And underneath I put the exact same thing but with cover added to your target. So again, 2 judgment tokens, but this time there's cover added into the mix. For anything with a 2-up base save that has access to cover, you lose at minimum half your damage output per model. So those Mega Knobs we saw in the last section, forget about it, you're not touching them. The squad of 6 will kill a single Mega Knob on average without access to the 4+++ if they have cover that negates your AP. Even for something in our prime target range like Primaris Intercessors, you'll only kill less than 2 on average with a squad of 3 Thunderkyn. Even worse, for something with a horrible save like a 5+ or 6+, it makes so much of an impact, dropping the amount of cultists we kill with a 3-man unit down from 6 to 5, which yes, is impactful because at OC1 on your Thunderkyn, if you're unable to kill at least 3 in combat, will lose the primary. So in summary, for the bolt cannon, the 36-inch range is really the only benefit you're taking this unit for. It falls behind to the bikes, which only cost 5 or 10 points more proportionally for a squad of 3 to 6, and you lose out on so much utility and board presence as a whole. Okay, so the next gun I want to look at is the SP Conversion Beamer. I'm pretty curious to see how this one holds up, coming in at 24-inch range, conversion keyword, sustained hits D3, 1 attack, BS4, strength 7, -1 AP, 3 damage. So naturally, this profile just screams anti-elite, right? There aren't enough shots to make it anti-chaff or anti-infantry like the bolt cannon. There isn't the anti-vehicle keyword literally on the weapon like we see with the Graviton, meaning that it'll naturally be less efficient into tougher targets. That leaves us with this gap of anti-elite. In this case, things that require quality 3 damage shots to put down, like Terminators or Possessed. But let's see how this weapon fares in the math. So again, same assumptions here, 2 judgment tokens on your target, bare bones. We're looking at this per model, and we're assuming that you're within conversion range, being 12 to 24 inches. So plugging the numbers in, we get a table that looks like this. Now, I didn't really like how these values looked visually because they're accounting for a single model on such a low volume of fire per model. So I went ahead and multiplied everything by 3 in the table to represent the output we might expect to see with a 3-man Thunderkyn squad equipped with SP conversion beamers. And if you wanted to get the output for a 6-man squad, you simply multiply the values on this new table by 2 since it already accounts for 3 models. So for now, we're just going to look at the output of 3 models instead on this new table. For a 3-man SP conversion squad of Thunderkyn, it looks like the juiciest values into realistic target profiles are at less than toughness 7 with a 3-up, 4-up, 5-up base save, or at the toughness 7 level with a 3-up or 4-up save. We're not yet going to consider invulns. One area that's particularly disappointing to me is a 2-up base save. So even for something where we effectively wound on 2s with our judgment tokens, the squad of 3 SP conversion beamers will only be able to inflict 1.39 unsaved wounds on average, meaning you'll get around 3 or 4 damage through with one squad. This is pretty horrible in my opinion because it means you'll only be able to kill a single Terminator with 3 SP conversion Thunderkyn in conversion range, meaning that this assumes you are far enough and have been able to properly either kite or keep a decent distance with your very slow 5-inch movement. But what about a squad of 6? Well, if we multiply the number of unsaved wounds by 2, we see that we actually managed to get a little bit more value out of the unit because of some of the residual unsaved wounds decimals being 0.39. In fact, it looks like on average we just about get 3 unsaved wounds through, picking up 3 Terminators, but it's super tight and marginally above average rolling. What this means is that a squad of 6 will probably be able to pick up between 2 to 3 Terminators on average, but pretty close to 3. In contrast, it looks like we will be able to kill more Terminators than the Bolt Cannon, who will only get about 1.5 on average due to requiring 2 shots at damage 2 to kill a single model that has 3 wounds because of the spillover. In this case, the Bolt Cannon is about half as effective into this target as the SP conversion. Okay, so what about something a little bit more durable like those Mega Knobs with the 4-up shrug? Well, it looks like the Feel No Pain absolutely devastates the output of this weapon at the 3 wound threshold for a damage 3 shot, reducing the amount of Terminator-esque bodies to 0. If we multiply the result by 2, a 6-man brick will kill 1 Mega Knob on average, which is actually equivalent to what we saw with the Bolt Cannon. But what about something in that ideal zone we identified a little bit earlier? Well, let's plug some examples in and see what happens. So again, something like a unit of Possessed, we see some pretty decent numbers here, being 2 killed for a squad of 3 or 4 killed for a squad of 6. But your opponent isn't an idiot, and he will do whatever he can to make sure that his unit gets into combat. Because of this, and a rampant access to cover, you will almost certainly be shooting this unit while it is under the benefit of cover. So let's see what actually happens and how this translates to on the table. And so we see that for a squad of 3 Thunderkyn with SP conversions, we'll now only pick up a single possessed model from the unit if they have access to cover, a reduction of 50% on the table. Interestingly, the squad of 6, while still seeing a reduction in the number of kills, will pick up between 2 and 3 models, so a little less of a drop off than what we saw with the 3-man. The problem now with this unit is that you've exposed yourself in order to shoot this prime target, and you've only killed about 20% of the unit. This discrepancy is further exaggerated when we look at our Terminators with a 2-up base save. Here we see that a squad of 6 will only be able to kill 1 single model on average, down from 3. Absolutely brutal. So what about low toughness 1-2 wound models? I put the charts of per model here, so no more squads of 3, that being a single SP conversion beamer on a model and a single bolt cannon on another model. As we could safely assume, we do get more unsaved wounds that go through for the bolt cannon, but this is basically universal across the entire board except for the T12 level, meaning that for anything with 2 wounds or less, you're better off taking the bolt cannon because the raw damage threshold doesn't require damage 3. That 1 extra damage is wasted on a 2 or 1 wound model. For those tougher targets such as knights, we do come out ahead with the SP conversion beamer because despite having the same amount of unsaved wounds go through per model, the damage 3 shots have more value here because they're all counting, they're all going into their target. So for every model shooting the knight, you essentially get 1 extra point of damage per SP conversion beamer when you compare that to the bolt cannon. When we look at invulnerable saves, we see the same pattern wherein the total amount of unsaved wounds are always higher except at toughness 12, but the overall raw damage is more with the SP conversion beamer. This makes sense because the AP of the profiles are identical, the volume of shots are higher on the bolt cannon, and the damage is larger on the SP. Now the very last thing I want to quickly see for the conversion beamer is what happens to the gun if we're not in conversion range, meaning we only crit on 6s, which is displayed in the graph below with the damage output bolded. And just to clarify, this is for a squad of 3, so 3 Thunderkyn. And what we see is a pretty sharp decrease in both the amount of raw damage and the total unsaved wounds that go through. In many cases, this is a significant impact on our expected damage output, where on average, we don't even kill a single Terminator with 3 Thunderkyn. We kill only 2 possessed with a squad of 6, being a reduction of 50% on the table. And even more troubling is when we compare a single bolt cannon to a single SP conversion beamer not within conversion range, where we now see not only the total amount of unsaved wounds come out ahead for the bolt cannon, but in all instances across the table, so too does the damage. And of course, this doesn't even factor in cover on your target. What this ultimately means for the loadout so far is that if you want to bake in some medium toughness 3 wound model shooting in your list, you are better off taking the conversion beamer compared to the bolt cannon, as the damage 3 profile allows you to pull ahead of the bolt cannon into these targets. You're also better off taking the conversion beamer in squads of 6 compared to squads of 3, as the average amount of unsaved wounds put into most of your appropriate 3 wound targets actually favors the larger squads to help pick up the extra model just because of how the decimal places fall. But please note, much like the bolt cannon, the weapon is extremely susceptible to the benefit of cover, in some cases having the expected output. Lastly, and most importantly, is that this weapon is absolutely neutered by not being in conversion range, falling behind universally to the bolt cannon. So if you do not think you'll be able to get into conversion range with this gun, just don't even bother taking it, because you might as well just take bolt cannons instead. And at that point, you might as well just pay 5-10 points more and take the bikes. Alright, last but not least, the infamous Graviton, which is everyone's default competitive choice for this unit. So I put the stats here up on the screen. It's anti-vehicle 2+, it has blast, it is range 18, attacks D6, BS 4, strength 5, minus 2 AP and 2 damage. And again, we're running the assumptions of 2 judgment tokens, bare bones, and this is a per model calculation. We're also going to pretend that there's no blast on the target, so no extra shots. And for the first calculation, we'll say that we are not shooting at vehicles, so this is a non-vehicle target. Plugging those numbers into the table, we get something that looks like this. Keep in mind, again, very important here, that we are pretending there is no blast and none of the targets on this table are vehicles, both of which will have drastic impacts on the results, as we'll see in a little bit. Right off the bat, if we look at where the numbers are highest for realistic targets, it looks like we get some pretty good results per model, quite evenly distributed across the table here, ranging from a little less than 1 damage up to nearly 4. I think this is largely attributed to the fact that this gun, unlike the previous 2 we examined, is AP 2, giving it a little extra punch, despite the lower strength, into things with a 2+ save. Plugging in some specific examples, we can see that into units containing less than 5 cultists, to emit blast of course, we wind up killing pretty reliably 2 models for every 1 Graviton. Which, if we compare that to the bolt cannon, we can see is extremely similar in output, killing exactly the same number of models, and we don't have blast. Same thing when we compare it to the SP conversion beamer, we actually reliably kill more with the Graviton into the cultists as a result of the volume of fire, so nothing too surprising here. But what about something a little bit tougher? Well, into Terminators, we see the extra AP really shine through as we edge slightly ahead of the twin bolt cannon, despite being a lower strength and wounding bracket. Very interestingly, we see the same thing against the SP conversion beamer, which was not expected for me. A gun we would imagine to be designed for anti-Terminators and anti-elites falls behind to the Graviton. Now this is per model, so how does this actually translate to a squad of 3? Incredibly, the Gravitons still come out ahead, even considering the potential 3 wound bracket requiring 2 damage shots to kill a single model. As such, both a squad of 3 Gravitons and a squad of 3 conversion beamers will both be able to kill a single Terminator, with the Graviton actually being marginally better. Okay, but what about the Possessed, a level where we said the SP conversion beamer is optimally designed to kill? So here we have our first loss for the Graviton, being able to only inflict enough damage to kill 1 model down from the SP conversion at 2 due to the damage profile of this weapon being flat 2 versus flat 3. But remember, this does not include blast, which you would very likely be benefiting from, and blast 2 at that for a squad of 10. So you know what? Let's see what that looks like. Running Blast, we see that the total amount of unsaved wounds increased up to 3.67 for a squad of 3 Thunderkyn equipped with Gravs, meaning we can reliably kill between 1 and 2 possessed, whereas the SP will still reliably pick up only 2. However, for a squad of 6, we actually see the Graviton now come out significantly closer to the SP conversion beamer, where the 3.67 unsaved wounds times 2 is equal to 7.34. Meaning that while the SP conversion beamer gets 4 unsaved wounds total going through, enough to kill 4 models clean, the Graviton will still kill about 3.5. This is very interesting for a weapon that, based on its profile, should not be able to compete so closely to one designed to kill this target. Okay, so let's revert back to our per model table for a moment here and remove Blast again. This time, let's look at how the two profiles compare into something very tough but not yet a vehicle, so not benefiting from the 2+ to wound. In this example against the Nightbringer, we actually see that the SP conversion beamer takes the lead by nearly double the damage per model, assuming that you're in conversion range. When we take a look at invulnerable saves, we do see the Gravitons fall a little bit behind because of the larger impact it has, cutting the benefits of AP2 versus AP1 and something that has a higher strength. So basically the AP of this weapon is helping to carry the damage up until it's lost with the invulnerable saves. While the differences per model are quite low, remember that a squad of 3 or 6 would be multiplied by that amount respectively, which could cause us to see the SP take a more significant lead over the Graviton when shooting at something that blocks your AP value. Similar trend for the bolt cannon here was at AP1, having damage less affected than its counterpart, the Graviton, simply because at this point your strength is higher than that of the Graviton and you're both essentially whittled down in terms of your AP value. However, the differences here are much closer to what we saw with the SP conversion, being negligible in many instances. Now for the part we've all been waiting for, let's fire these bad boys into some tanks. I put here at the top table the output of 3 Thunderkyn with Gravs shooting into vehicles compared to the same 3 at the bottom who do not gain access to crits on 2s. Just to highlight the differences we see when we do shoot at a vehicle and get to make use of our 2+ to crit. And yes, before I forget to mention, the Gravs against vehicles do take the lead universally against the SP conversion beamer, except for things less than toughness 7 with a 4-up invuln in terms of vehicles, where we get slightly less raw damage but ultimately more unsaved wounds that go through. But I can't actually think of any vehicles right now that fit this profile, so this may just be strictly theoretical. Okay, back to the Gravs on Gravs. We can already see at the hardest bracket being a 2+ base save, the impact this keyword has, giving us between 2 to 3.5 extra raw damage through to our target for the same exact squad. The gap increases ridiculously fast as we move into worse base saves, peaking at an extra 7 damage into a theoretical toughness 10 target with a 5+ save. In practice, we can expect the data to mostly stop at the 4+ base save level, unless there's some really weird orc vehicle I'm not thinking of. Now this is actually a good point that I want to talk about for a second. I put here on the screen the same 3-man unit at the top versus a 6-man unit at the bottom. Now obviously a 6-man will do double the damage you see of the 3, nothing crazy here. The thing I want to call to question is whether or not a 3-man unit has any merit. Looking at the stats for the 6-man, I think we can all agree that these guys can basically one-shot any played vehicle in the game if it isn't benefiting from any added traits like cover or armor contempt, especially when we move into the 3+ base save category, except for big knights of course. So what about the 3-man? If you asked me 2 weeks ago, I would have told you that the only viable way to run these guys is a 6-man brick because you otherwise won't really be able to kill anything in one activation. But with the popularity of the Orc Codex that just came out, and the rampant amount of medium toughness vehicles that have poor saves, there might actually be a compelling argument to run smaller units of 3. Take for instance a truck, which comes in at toughness 8 with a 4+ base save and 10 wounds. On average, we just about kill it with a 3-man unit without needing to feel like we committed so many points just to crack something small open and die to the punchback. So I think this is a really interesting consideration to keep in mind. So what does this ultimately mean? Well, with the Graviton generally outperforming the bolt cannon into the targets we would expect to shoot the bolt cannon at, and being fairly comparable to the conversion beamer while also dominating both options in anti-tank, it's understandable why this weapon became the default competitive choice. In fact, there really isn't much point to choosing the other weapons when we consider what little advantages they bring. In terms of the Graviton itself, a 6-man strong unit will reliably be able to delete almost any vehicle you shoot at with a 3+ base save or higher, except for large knights. So I think for this reason, if you want a point and delete unit for these targets, you absolutely want these in packs of 6 versus 3. Now that said, I actually do see a world where the 3-man starts becoming a little bit more common for orc matchups, where a lot of their vehicles are medium toughness, medium wounds, and fairly weak base saves. These targets are ripe for a 3-man unit, who has a much smaller footprint, costs fewer points, and is able to efficiently kill their targets without you caring too much about losing them to the return fire. Now, I wrote competitive in quotations here because, as I've been alluding to in this video, I actually do kind of question how powerful this unit really is on the table outside of strict theory. And let me explain why. The first argument I want to make, and one that we've already seen for the bolt cannon SP conversion, is the impact cover has on this unit. Let's take another look at our Giga Chad 6-man Graviton unit ready to delete a target. I threw some numbers on the screen here for the same 6-man unit shooting something that has the benefit of cover. With no way of ignoring it, and rapid access to cover in this current game, we should very easily expect to see the results below. And what we do see in this case is a significant decrease in damage, bringing things with a 2+ and 3+ base save down by roughly 4 damage total. At the 2+ base save specifically, we could see the damage from a 6-man unit drop down from 11.67, which would be enough to effectively kill a Dreadnought in one activation, down to only 7.78. This is significant because what this now means is that instead of reliably killing the Dreadnought body, we now leave it alive on 4 to 5 wounds. At the 3+ base save, like Gladiator tanks or Armigers, here we go from guaranteeing to kill with damage to spare to being about 0.33 damage under the required amount to kill, meaning that this makes things very, very tight, possibly failing to pick up the model if your opponent uses a command reroll or gets slightly above average luck. Thankfully, being AP2 at least means that anything being hit at the invuln level, like a Doomstalker for instance who sits at a 3+ save, won't cause us to lose any damage from being in cover because they'll still move up 1 point of their AP to their invuln. But what happens now if your opponent layers his cover save with some other defensive bonus like Armor of Contempt or equivalent? Here we see the pitiful outcome of double stacked defensive buffs on our target from the 6-man Thunderkyn unit's perspective, dropping in many cases upwards of more than half the damage, completely negating our output and leaving you completely exposed in return. And herein lies the two other issues with this unit. The first of the two, and second on our list, being the low threat range and slow movement. So I put the data card back here on the screen for you to see. What I want you to look at is the effective threat range of 23 inches, being a 5-inch move and the 18-inch range on the guns. This is extremely poor in my opinion because it limits your ability to actually deliver these guys reliably into your targets. You only have 2 means for delivering this unit, the first one starting them on the board and being limited to your 5-inch move, which is pitiful. This means you need to commit several turns to actually walk them into position while also not getting shot, just to get in range of your ideal target, potentially. The second method is through strategic reserves, which means you are restricted in where you enter the table from, and most importantly, at the discretion of your opponent's screens. What this means is that a good player in both of these examples can ensure you never get to shoot into your ideal target with this unit. But let's say for argument's sake that your opponent leaves you a large enough gap to fit the squad, or you manage to walk into range of a target. Herein comes the third issue, which is their low survivability at base save 3 with 3 wounds. In this example we will use a meta staple, the Necron Doomstalker. Whether I walk into range miraculously unscathed or I pop out of reserves, my opponent decides to overwatch me, dealing about 2 to 3 unsaved wounds on average to my unit at damage 3 each, effectively killing upwards of half of my squad. Now suddenly my output is dropped significantly, and I no longer have the potential to kill this unit in one activation. This is huge because I invested points in this unit to serve the only goal of trading into vehicles, which it now fails to do. Furthermore, after I resolve my attacks, the rest of the squad disintegrates during my opponent's turn with the very same model that they failed to kill. This low survivability means you absolutely need to take an Iron Master with the unit, not only for the independence away from judgment tokens, but simply out of necessity to survive. At that point, I'm spending 235 points just to get one activation of shooting into lists that have damage 3 weapons readily available. As such, I strongly recommend you take a character attached to a 6-man unit, not only for the added independence of not being reliant on tokens because you now get to hit on 3s and still wound vehicles on 2s, but also for the added survivability of being able to absorb some of those high damage shots and keep your Thunderkyn alive long enough at least to hopefully deliver the killing blow. Now, all that said, I do think there are a couple of stratagems which could be effective in supporting this unit. The first one being Ancestral Sentence. This could really help ensure that you kill whatever target you're shooting at, which could be significant if you've lost a model or two already from the unit or need a little bit of extra damage to guarantee it. It can also be a massive boost to anti-horde killing considering you stack this with your blast. Just for fun real quick, because I know how much we all love seeing big numbers on the screen, here's what the damage looks like into a vehicle when you pop Sustained Hits 2 for a 6-man unit. A pretty significant and crazy output, essentially one-shotting a big knight that doesn't pop their 4-up invuln. This could be huge in a matchup if you manage to get the shots on them. However, I think what's actually even more interesting is that if we take any of these values and divide them by 2 for a squad of 3, we actually see some pretty respectable damage come through here. So maybe there is some potential in taking smaller units of 3 and using the Sustained Hits 2 strat to guarantee close kills that could then be chipped by something else in your list without committing too many points. Like Dreadnoughts, for instance, who would now take 8.75 damage for a squad of 3. I think this is pretty significant. Another strat which might have some merit is Fallback Shoot and Charge. If you survive the charge with enough models where it's worth shooting or moving on to an objective, it could be a really helpful way of boosting your output with the unit when you otherwise would be wasting points. Because believe me, these guys absolutely hate being stuck in melee. I think this is another issue I have with them, is that their threat range is so low that it puts you in a vulnerable position at the hands of your opponent's counter charge. And I respect that as a result of this, the unit can overwatch on 5s, which could be helpful for sure. But if you do end up in melee, you're basically done for, as you don't actually have any melee output capabilities whatsoever. Also, you have blast on the weapon, which means if you try to shoot at something that's in combat, you're actually not allowed to. So just another weird reason why I think this unit falls a little flat. The last strat I'll mention is Void Armor, which obviously provides a great survival boost to any unit it's used on. The problem with Void Armor on this squad in particular is that at base save 3, you're still very likely to eat a ton of damage, especially when you consider what kind of weapons will be shooting at you. Something at AP 3, for instance, goes down to AP 2, which still puts you on a 5-up base save. Even if you were to be standing in cover and you had Void Armor, you still only make 50% of the saving throws. As such, I think there are much better recipients for this stratagem and other units you'd probably try to keep alive instead. I hope I wasn't too harsh on this unit today, as I tried to show you both the pros and cons. At 85 or 170 points respectively, I don't think they're bad or unviable at all. Clearly not, because there are some people who manage to take it in their lists and make it work. I just can't help but feel like it's missing a little something more just to help give it that edge. Whether it's 4 wounds apiece instead of 3, or maybe the character's drones can give ignore cover or a 5-up invuln or something, which I think could be really interesting, because then you basically need to choose if you want to allocate your damage to the Thunderkyn or if you want to put it on the drones and save your Thunderkyn instead. So you get this pretty interesting trade-off between retaining offensive or defensive bonuses, which wouldn't be too unbalanced, because at the very least, the efficiency of your unit decreases if you choose to prioritize keeping those buffs. I would also like to see the other weapon options rebalanced a little bit. It feels like the grabs were created first and then the others as an extension or afterthought just to give the unit more options. I mean, just look at the character who only comes equipped with a mini Graviton gun. It just feels incongruous with any of the other choices you have available for the squad if you decide to attach a character to them, whose weapon stat lines all paint a clear picture as to what their intended use is, but they just don't really translate to that on the table. A little bit of a rant there, but it's only because I love the models and I want a little bit more out of them. But anyway, wrapping the video up, I want to leave you with some careful considerations and a small summary to keep in mind for when you decide to run this unit. I do think the Graviton is the best choice. It has the most amount of play to the most amount of targets. It's fairly comparable in terms of output to the other weapon choices you have into their ideal targets, and it always pulls ahead into vehicles. It's also less of a headache than managing the risk of the SP conversion beamer, which sounds great on paper, but is actually kind of underwhelming when something is in cover or is negatively affecting your conversion range. I would say 6-man units with a character are probably the best way to get value out of your unit. While being more expensive, it helps ensure not only that they get to shoot at full power into your targets with the added survivability, but it also means you get to be a little bit more independent, hitting anything on 3s and wounding vehicles on 2. So basically you free up your judgment tokens, which you can use somewhere else instead. That said, I could kind of see a world where people opt for many smaller 3-man units in a list instead, probably if orcs do become a more dominant army. I'm all for this. I think being only 85 points and having a few smaller units could feel a lot better in terms of trading when you know that they'll still have a significant impact into both the vehicles and any large units they're shooting at thanks to blast. An important consideration is to plan for your delivery. Know that these guys, assuming a 6-man brick, has a massive footprint which can and will be screened by competent players and by most lists. This means there are realities where you will need to start this unit on the table instead and use it to act as an Overwatch deterrent early game for some of your other models who your opponent might try to move block. I forgot to mention this earlier, but a 3-man squad can also be delivered via a Hecaton land fortress, but we don't really see this used all that often because the Hearthguard are much more impactful to carry within this transport. I will say that I do wish you could fit a full squad of 6 inside one because it would at least help compensate for their slow movement and their small threat range. Also worth keeping in mind that the unit, while being toughness 6 with 3 wounds, still only sits at a 3-up save. This could be dangerous because you may not always get the benefit of cover depending on where or how you enter the board from, and as such, it's very easy to have this unit suddenly saving on 5s or even 6s. With that said, there are some ways to help mitigate this through stratagem support, such as with Void Armor. You can likewise boost the damage with sustained hits too, which has more value on the Gravs thanks to their high volume of shots and blast. All in all, I do think that the Thunderkyn are a really cool unit. They potentially fit a role in our roster that we currently lack, which is reliable anti-vehicle shooting, and I'm curious to see how they fare in the looming meta. As always, if you enjoyed this video and kind of content, please don't forget to subscribe, like, and leave a comment down below. Consider joining our Discord server free of charge to join in on all things Votann related. Let me know what you think about the Thunderkyn. I know they're a lot of people's favorite units. I'm curious to hear how they've been performing in your lists. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll catch you all in the next one.